Good evening and welcome to our St. Paul Learn with the League. The Learn with the League program is a series of educational programs bear with me. Yep. The Learn with the League program is a series of educational and informative programs that is part of the League of Women Voters St. Paul programming for our community. This is the first of the 2022 programs that the St. Paul League will be presenting. Tonight's program is, what is the Equal Rights Amendment and why does it matter? We're excited to be offering this presentation on a topic that has a deep history with the League of Women Voters nationwide. We have events such as this approximately 8 to 10 times each year. As always, if you are interested, you can watch the programs on the League of Women Voters St. Paul YouTube channel and register for upcoming events. My name is Beatrice Owen, and I'm the co-chair of the program committee here at the League of Women Voters St. Paul. For over 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked as a citizens league to improve our government and engage all citizens in the decisions that impact their lives. The League is a nonpartisan membership organization dedicated to you, our community. We join the efforts of 800 state and local leagues to bring nonpartisan political advocacy, education, and empowerment to the local level. Check out our website to learn more about membership in the League of Women Voters. We welcome new members throughout the year. Give us a try. Our program is supported this evening with the League of Women Voters Roseville area and the League of Women Voters White Bear Lake area. We are also supported by Suburban Community Channels and St. Paul Neighborhood Network. We thank our supporters this evening. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are learning today on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota, Minnesota, and the current home of many Native nations, including Mini Dakota and Ojibwe. The program tonight is being recorded and broadcast on Facebook Live. Towards the end of the program, our presenter will take questions from our audience. Please use the Zoom Q&A bubble on the bottom of the screen to ask your questions. If you're watching on Facebook Live, feel free to put your questions in the comment section. We are using the new Zoom closed caption feature, and they are auto-generated, so they may not be exact. We also have a couple of polls this evening, and we are going to present those polls right now. So if we could put those up on the screen and give you a little bit of time. We're looking for information from all of you on the following 3 questions. So feel free to take the poll right now. The first question is, do men and women already have guaranteed equal rights in the U.S. Constitution? And the answers are yes or no. Number 2, would you support an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that guarantees equal rights for men, both men and women? And the third question, do you have a preference for the wording of the Minnesota Constitution Amendment? And there are 2 options there, so you get to select. First one is, equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied on account of gender. And the second is, equality under the law shall not be abridged or denied on account of sex. So I'll give you a minute to answer yes or no. Select which of the 2 that are there. Our presenter will be discussing and sharing, talking about the results from these polls. So if you could, I'll give you just a minute. Most of you, it looks like most of you have answered, so that's fantastic. We'll leave that up there for just a minute. Our next screen has some interesting information that I hope you all will make a note of. The first one is, let's see if I can go forward with this. Oh, we'll keep going. We'll keep going with the polling. So almost everybody has answered the poll. And all right, so get that out of the way. Thank you for taking those polls. We appreciate it very much. On the screen, we have the year's election calendar. So we have our primary here in Minnesota on August 9th, and then the general election is November 8th. Look for candidates forums and voter guides from your local leagues. The leagues are here to help you make informed voting decisions. Tonight's presentation on the Equal Rights Amendment will cover information about what the ERA is, its history, and its current status. I would like to take a moment and just remind everybody that which you already know, that equality has a mixed history here in our country. During the winter of 1776, in the middle of a epidemic with enemy troops nearby, Abigail Adams was busy managing the family farm, raising their 4 children, and she wrote a letter to her husband, John Adams. It's famous now, but her one line asked, quote, "Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors," end quote. This was as John Adams and the other men were discussing the Constitution. So it was a most excellent exhortation, and we're still here. There is work to be done, and that's why we're here today. This is excellent. So the League of Women Voters has been a longtime supporter of the ERA. The League seeks to secure equal rights and equal opportunity for all, supports the ratification and helping bring laws into compliance with the goals of the ERA, supports equal rights for all, and has fought hard for the passage of the ratification of the ERA since the 1970s. We are excited and pleased this evening to have Suzanne Wilhite as our presenter. Suzanne Wilhite is the current and recently elected ERA Minnesota organization president. She has been involved in human rights, voting rights, politics, elections, and a variety of other issues for many years. In 2016, she focused on enacting the Equal Rights Amendment as a foundational constitutional right needed for all persons. Equality of legal rights for all persons is a core value for her. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Willhite. We are glad that Suzanne could join us. Suzanne, there you are. Thank you for being here. And you'll need to unmute your screen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I am going to have a presentation for you because I've got information to share. So I'm going to pull up my presentation now, and it'll take just a minute while we get this going. So hopefully you will see my screen in front of you with the Supreme Court building. Okay. Well, you answered a few poll questions, and I looked at the responses that were coming in. I think we've got a pretty smart audience here. You probably know that currently, even though we've got Lady Justice at the top of our Supreme Court, women are not included in our current Constitution. And some people may argue with that, so we'll touch on some of those points as we go through. But there's a lot at stake in terms of knowing what's in our Constitution and what's not in our Constitution. So I think it is important for all people to know what is in the Constitution, the founding document of our United States, and also of our Minnesota Constitution. So I'm with Equal Rights Amendment Minnesota, ERA Minnesota. It was founded in 2014 by Betty Folliard, former legislator and activist. She's been involved with equal rights amendments for many years. And she, like many women across the country, are still fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. But we're on a precipice, so there's good news. But we have a lot to talk about. Every year we go back to the Minnesota legislature and advocate, and we will be there again. We've got some upcoming events, so I'll tell you more about those. But we all know that there's documented unequal treatment and patterns of bias way back from when Abigail Adams made that comment. So we know that there is discrimination on the basis of sex. And there are ways to remedy that, and we'll talk about those. So what is the Equal Rights Amendment? I'll give a brief history, and a lot of that you know, because a lot of that history is with the League of Women Voters and women's suffrage. Why do we need it? Some of the arguments for and against. Why now? Some people say we don't need it. And then there's next steps for those who think we do, like myself, what can we do to make that happen? So what is it? The majority of Americans actually think that we already have equal rights. A poll in 2016 of general public said that 80% polled mistakenly believe men and women are already equal in our Constitution. And I think what was coming up from the poll was 93% of you said no. So you're smarter than the average person out there, no surprise, but most people support it. That is the truth of the matter, that over 94% said they would support an amendment to the US Constitution. In your poll, I think, would you support 100%? Well, that's great. So we're with good company here. But most people think it already passed and that we should have it, but they also think this is across party lines. This is not a partisan issue. Of all three parties, there's still over 90%. And even between men and women, 90% of men think that women should have equality, or all persons should have equality. So surprisingly, this is not that much of a controversial issue from the public, but it is politically. So we have some work to do. What it is, it's pretty simple. We've got the words right here in front of us. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. You notice it doesn't say women, and the 19th Amendment didn't say women either, but it includes us, and we haven't been included in the Constitution. So this is the federal language for the Equal Rights Amendment, and we also have a proposed Minnesota Equal Rights Amendment, because we thought this was going to pass way back in the 70s, and 26 other states put it in their state constitutions from that time. Minnesota didn't, because we ratified in 1973, thinking it was going to happen federally. But our language recently has been updated to be more inclusive. So we actually have several bills, and we have both the language of equality on account of sex and on account of gender. And both words legally mean the same thing, sex and gender. But today, gender is more inclusive. So when you voted, you also voted that gender got a little higher view on that in terms of the poll that was taken here is preference for the wording. Gender has a preference for voters, but depending on who voters are, this group, gender is higher. So there's the language, not too difficult, not too controversial, and it's something that most people agree with. So I think one of the things we have to kind of do for definitions is just know that what we're talking about, because currently we don't have sex discrimination in our Constitution. We have protections of various kinds. We have a Bill of Rights, but sex discrimination is a very defined entity, and we use the language from the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and that says basically sex discrimination involves treating someone unfavorably because of that person's sex. It's pretty simple, but it is something that we need to keep in mind because we don't have a lot of these protections as women. And we see that in our daily lives, and we'll talk more about that, what that really involves. It's deeply embedded in our history and our culture. And so it's something that is worth addressing and needs legal remedies. So brief history, and this is a lot of what you already know, because American law, we originated with English common law, and essentially women were covered under males, whether it was their father, their husband, the brother, or even a son. A married woman could not own property. Children were not considered her property. She was property of the male. Women couldn't vote, and women and girls were totally dependent on males for their civil rights. And some of that has changed over time, and it was different for different states, but federally, we get a lot of our rights from that US Constitution. So we go back to the founders and, remember the ladies with John Adams, and they forgot, and they left out purposely. I mean, this was a document, and we know this with our current version of history, where it was intended for white men of property. They had some aspirational goals. They started out with "we the people," but they very quickly essentially said, no, we really didn't mean you, or you, but that's our history. The Constitution was written by white men with property, and it did not hold an equal place for other people. So women fought for the right to vote, and that history is well known with the League of Women Voters. I've learned a lot in the last 10 years, really just thinking about learning what wasn't taught in my high school history or college at that time. 1848, Seneca Falls, women trying to get the right to vote and struggling, and they had the whole Declaration of Sentiments. But really, they settled on one thing that they thought would make a difference, which was getting the right to vote. So here we are, 1848, abolitionists and suffragists both working together. And it's interesting to learn the history between Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, because they were good friends and they fought together on those issues. And they supported one another through this, but there was struggle when it came time with the Black men getting the right to vote and women not. And there was hostility between white women who did not feel Black men deserved the right to vote before them. And we've learned more about this in our current history. But after the Civil War, it was necessary. And, it's like conquer and divide and conquer. And Black men were given the right to vote. So 13th is the abolition, end of slavery. 14th is supposedly the Equal Protection Clause, except doesn't exactly equally protect us. And then 15th, the right of former slave men to vote. So here we are coming in the long struggle. Here's marches from 1913, and we know it started in 1848 and long before that. So long history here of women trying to get the right to vote, trying state by state, traveling across the country. And it's hard to imagine how they could be so effective when essentially women had no rights to influence other than begging and pleading for the men who could vote to give them that right. So finally, women get the right to vote in 1920, and there's great history there. I've read several books about how it came down to just a crazy chaos in Tennessee, which would have been the last possible state, and how they left the state, some legislators, how people were getting bought with alcohol and money to win their votes. And it was a real challenge to get it over the line. And a lot of women gave a lot of work to get the right to vote, which this group knows much about. So that suffrage movement turned into the League of Women Voters. And I didn't know that history. I didn't know much about the League of Women Voters, but I've certainly learned a lot. And I value that there was this big need once women got the vote to have education for all people about voting. But that wasn't enough. Voting for women was the start. And so in terms of education, there was also the need to have equal legal rights. And that was what the women really wanted from the start. And they got the right to vote after 100 years. And 1923, Alice Paul, the more radical side of the campaigns to get the right to vote, said, well, we need more than this. We need equal rights. So she penned the Equal Rights Amendment, and it had 3 sections. Section 1 was essentially the language that was proposed. And Section 2 is Congress should have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. And 3 was the amendment shall take effect 2 years after the date of ratification. And so these are key pieces about the Equal Rights Amendment that come into play of what its current status is. But here we have it again, 1923, Equal Rights Amendments proposed, but it is proposed in every session of Congress for 50 years. 50 years, they have essentially roadblocks as chairs in these committees that will not advance the bill in Congress for a vote to send it to the states. So much frustration of women, again, trying to get rights. They can vote, but they don't have the power in our Congress, House and Senate to put the vote out to the people and the states to ratify this amendment. So many, many years again of marching and pushing and advocating. And finally, in 1972, coming on the heels of civil rights movement, there was a lot of civil unrest, and women's movement came on the tails of that and said, well, we want equal rights. We still want equal rights. And so finally, Congress was pressured as more women rallied and marched that they finally passed the bills in 1972 that would send the amendment out to the states. So we get 1972 from 1923, 50 years, and it starts moving out to the states. Now this is a little hard to see, but I found a proposed amendment from that time, what Congress passed. And it's part of the controversy now is what was included and what did states vote on? Because there were 3 articles, as I mentioned, that Alice Paul wrote, but in the preamble, they put a time limit. And at the time, Alice Paul called that a poison pill. She knew that putting a time limit on an amendment could kill it. But at the same time, they had finally gotten through the process. So the time limit put in 1972 was 7 years. All states must ratify by 3/4 within 7 years from the date of the submission. Now that preamble is key because this is where people say, nope, it's dead. Well, it's a legal question, but none of the states voted on the time limit. They voted on the articles. So legal people will fight about this just as they did for the women's right to vote, the 19th Amendment, because I learned that there were years and years of lawsuits about women getting the right to vote. But we do have the right to vote, and that still stands. So the question of, does this preamble and the time limit affect the Equal Rights Amendment? Well, we see that this was for 7 years. Congress extended it. Both houses extended it so it would have been 7 years, passed in 72. They extended it 3 years to 1982, and Congress did that. So they extended it once, they could eliminate it. Congress put the time limit on, Congress could take the time limit off. That's a legal question, but none of the states voted for the time limit. They voted for the articles themselves. So we get into this piece where what happened? By 1982, we were getting a backlash of conservatism. And I don't know how many people remember Phyllis Schlafly, the Eagle Forum, and a lot of the conservative Christian movement. This is when Ronald Reagan got elected. And we see this move back towards women go home, bake cookies, and this is going to be devastating for women. And a lot of women were torn between standing up for the Equal Rights Amendment and being opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. So there was a turning of the country in terms of support. It had massive support, and some would say it still did, but I think it was very effective lobbying from the Eagle Forum and Phyllis Schlafly and her group, and some of the larger conservative Christian groups that really had an impact on this. So some people say it died, but do we still need it? Yeah, I would say yes, we do. We have a lot of sex discrimination that's still as serious as it's ever been, and we don't have a current remedy for it. We've picked and pulled at different pieces of laws and protections. RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, made arguments for women and discrimination, but there have been ones and twos, and it often gets repealed or not reenacted, such as the Violence Against Women Act that then Senator Joe Biden proposed and passed, but has not been renewed. So what had provided protections for women in violent situations is no longer a law. So part of the question around do we still need it is we have many issues that women particularly face that make protection on the basis of sex still necessary. So coming back to that key issues of sex discrimination, we have a gender pay gap, and we know this. We know the numbers. Every year we go through equality days of, when do women catch up with men from the previous year? White women, we're at 82 cents on the dollar for same job, equal pay for equal work, with the lowest being Latina women at 54 cents per dollar, same job. That gender pay gap has barely moved in years. So that is a huge, and that to me is the number one, because half of our population, actually 51%, is women. And if you could pay half your population less money for their wage, might be good for you as a company, but it's not good for women in their home environment, their retirement. Many senior women's in poverty because they didn't make adequate money to support families. So gender pay gap is huge. Sexual harassment, we know this happens. It happens a lot. Sex discrimination in the workplace, those are very significant. The whole movements we've seen in the last 10 to 5 years really highlighting this. Sexual violence, as I mentioned, the Violence Against Women Act not being renewed. In unequal access to medical care and discrimination. We know we have one of the highest mortality rates, even for Black women. I just watched a Zoom conference about that, and it's appalling what medical care they are not receiving and the mortality for women and children. And then we've seen the COVID pandemic that has set back women's labor force participation more than 30 years. That's from the Department of Labor. So women were in the workforce over 50% and had made strides, not equal in pay, but they were in many positions. And now we've seen women going home, taking care of kids, leaving jobs, and in taking care of elders, also being those essential workers who do not have access to the care economy and a fair wage. So there's a lot of issues have bubbled up in this last 2 years, just highlighting what we all know, that there's a lot of issues out there. So as I mentioned, the gender pay gap is huge. The numbers are there. 60% of those minimum wage workers are women. And they're, a quarter of our households are headed by women, have children. And we've seen some of the impacts for childcare and education with those folks. So unequal pay and workplace sexual harassment still very strongly linked. And we know we don't have good ways of addressing that. That sexual harassment, over 50% of young people, this is a current statistic, experience some sexual harassment at work. And this is, even younger folks. So this is not going away. It is something that we need to address culturally. And if most have both parents working, this affects discrimination in the workplace as well. So we know that there's issues with that. Sexual violence, sadly, this has also increased during COVID with people in close quarters and difficult relationships. And the numbers, women are high, 80%, but 43% of men also form of sexual harassment. So we know this isn't just a woman's issue, but it's majority women. I mentioned the Violence Against Women Act, the VAWA, and that has been thrown out because of the lack of foundation of sex discrimination in our Constitution. So we have some big holes in our systems that don't protect a majority of women, but it would make a difference for all people, and that is why it doesn't specifically say women in that amendment. So medical care, we've touched a little bit on it. The Affordable Care Act, here's another piecemeal. They did try to eliminate gender discrimination in medical care, but it's very limited in scope. And we know the issues around family planning and pregnancy care, not well funded and not well supported currently with our medical systems. So we have these arguments for and against, and some of them are old as the previous fights in the 70s, but just a reminder that this was not a partisan issue. The ERA was introduced by the Republican Party. It was a white middle class movement. It had been opposed by big business and organized labor, partly because of the wage gap. They didn't want to pay that. And organized labor had achieved some improvements, specifically highlighting women, like some protections in the workforce for numbers of hours they could work, and for limited, if they were pregnant, there were some protections. But the truth is those have mostly disappeared, and we have more protections that are not sex specific, but more person specific. So in terms of a male needing some accommodations in a workplace, it's more defined to the person than to the sex. So the organized labor preferences have mostly gone away. So we still have a need to have protections on the basis of sex. So not a partisan issue. Both parties put it in their platforms in the 40s. It came out after Reagan from the Republican Party. So the Democratic Party still carries it in a platform, but the Republican Party hasn't. But it was not a partisan issue, and it is not considered a partisan issue for most people who support it. So there's another argument that the 14th Amendment, the equal protection, includes protection against sex discrimination, except it doesn't. It doesn't cover pay. We've had cases go all the way to the Supreme Court. We know this from Betty Duke. We know it from Lily Ledbetter, that we know that pay discrimination has not been upheld when it goes to the Supreme Court. We've had different courts. Earl Warren's court was more liberal and started to include women as an inferred person by the 14th Amendment. But in our new court with John Roberts since 2005, they are more leaning towards that originalist or textualist interpretation, which would throw us right back into women being covered under the males. So that when you know your history, you don't necessarily want to go back to an originalist view and say women have no rights at all and are covered under males. So 14th Amendment hasn't really worked for us. A quote here from Scalia, and he said, certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't. And that is part of the problem. We have sex discrimination. It affects half our population in many ways, and yet we don't have a remedy for that in our foundational document, our Constitution. And RBG had supported the Equal Rights Amendment and would have liked to have that added to our Constitution. So she was well known for her desire to have equal laws, not special laws for women, but equal laws and protection. So another argument is, well, we have all these laws. We don't need a constitutional amendment. But the truth is laws can change, just as I mentioned about the Violence Against Women Act, that laws can be changed in our Congress, but a constitution is not as easy to change. We know that prohibition came and went, but that was very difficult. They had to follow the same process to remove that amendment. But laws can be changed more easily. But the Constitution is a bedrock. And it also says that at that point, when we would add it as a constitutional amendment, it gives us higher scrutiny or level of protection that is similar to race, religion, and national origin. So that is something that would allow the cases to have higher protection for sex discrimination. Another argument, the ERA would expand abortion rights. And this is one that's still used and very strong, and you see it a lot in the States. But really, 26 states, as I mentioned, have state equal rights amendments, and they don't necessarily protect against expanding abortion rights. Texas has an equal rights amendment that protects on the basis of sex, race, national origin, I believe, and they have the most strict abortion law now passed in any state. So there are different areas where laws apply. Abortion, Roe v. Wade was decided on a privacy decision. And so it's not necessarily correlated. And 26 states, if you could think of which ones they were, are not abortion havens. They are in the foundation documents in the state level, but that does not mean that they do not allow any kind of abortion without restrictions. They do. And so that's a false argument that's easy to dispute with our existing state equal rights amendments. So a fourth argument was about women being drafted. Nobody wanted their daughters drafted in the military. So this is another area where we actually see more women who want to serve in the military voluntarily, up 14%. And now they're being restricted from combat positions. So they're actually being discriminated on the basis of their sex to not be able to advance in the military. So this is something that would be a case to be brought forward because these women want to have those career advancements. They're fully qualified. And right now they're being discriminated against from moving into those positions. So that's an area where I think that tide has turned and the military has not had the draft and is not likely to bring back the draft. So that's an argument that is hopefully dead, but one that needs resolution for equality. So why now? Why is this becoming more active? You've seen this with, I think the Women's March really put some energy back into this, but there also was some major movement with some states that ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. So in 2017, Nevada ratified as a state. We've got a map here of most of the pink they had already ratified. So you look at that, that's a quite a number. That was 35 states, including Alaska. We've got in Hawaii down there. But you look at what the Southeast, actually Florida has a state Equal Rights Amendment, so some of that doesn't quite make sense. But Nevada elected their first majority women legislature, 2017. They immediately started passing things that women felt were important, and one of them was the Equal Rights Amendment. They ratified the amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. Illinois ratified in 2018. Now that's the home of Phyllis Schlafly. So that was one of the last northern states that hadn't ratified the ERA previously. And one of the issues there was that's the home of a lot of insurance companies, and the insurance companies were charging women more for their insurance and healthcare. And so there was some question of whether that corporations, who don't want to either pay more in a wage or don't want to give up discriminatory costs that they've built in for women. So Illinois ratified in 2018, and then Virginia, they worked very diligently for 10 years or more actually to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified in Virginia. And they did that in 2020. So January 2020, 2 years ago, Virginia was the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, which means that's 38 states. That's the constitutional requirement for 3/4 of states ratifying a proposed amendment. And the lawsuit started. So as I mentioned, these are the states that already have an Equal Rights Amendment. You'll see the blue. And so these are the states that if you thought there were going to be issues about, oh my God, what's going to happen if there's equality in state constitutions? Well, most people don't know that those exist. And what they often are used for is specific cases that go to their state Supreme Court. And actually, there are many cases brought by men because they feel discriminated against. And because of the language, that's what it's intended, is for all people. And so if men, women, anyone could feel like they're discriminated, they have the right to bring a case through the court system. So you see 3 states in yellow. These are states that said, wait a minute, we kept waiting for the federal, and they started working on state constitutional equal rights amendments. So we're Minnesota. We've also, Maine is in the middle of this as well. And this part of this presentation was developed by Maine because they're in the same position of trying to get it passed in their state constitution. So it's a little similar to what Women's Right to Vote was working on, whether you go state by state or try to get a federal, and it's happened both ways. And some of the states that didn't put it in their constitution are still working on that. Arizona is working on it. North and South Carolina are working on it. Utah is working on it. So many of these states are both trying to either ratify or get it in their state constitutions as well, because wanting that protection on the basis of sex. So state ARA, as I mentioned, it's pretty simple. It essentially covers us for state laws where women or anyone would have equal protection on the basis of sex. And really, it's a message to say sex discrimination is prohibited. We as a country and as a culture really need to address sex discrimination head on. And, we do bits and pieces of it, but it's something that culturally we really want to have zero tolerance of. So Federal ERA, we are the only developed nation with a constitution that does not explicitly protect the rights of women. And looking at several other countries, we helped Afghanistan write their constitution, and we required them to provide equality for all people. And we required them to put percentages of people, women, and into their legislatures. I don't know if that will hold as things turn over, but we were very eager to tell them how they should set up their constitution, but we've been unable to update our own constitution to have equality for all persons. So what are we doing here? Minnesota, we've been advocating, educating, organizing, activating for equality many years. We do a lot of education, and we will be at anywhere we can to talk about this, because part of the issue is most people think we already have it. And so they say, well, what's the big deal? We already have that. No, we don't. We also have gone to Washington, D.C. to show our support with our federal coalition partners and advocate for the finalization of our federal Equal Rights Amendment. So lots of work to do. Luckily, we have good support with our senators, Amy Klobuchar, Tina Smith, both strong supporters. We can get it through the House. We've gotten the time limit changed in our US House for a couple sessions, and that's easy to do. We've got that right now. It's the Senate that has not had a hearing and not voted to eliminate the timeline. That's a legal question. Congress put it in. Congress can take it out. So our Senate is a roadblock for the federal Equal Rights Amendment. And technically, what happened under the Trump administration is when Virginia was about to ratify, it was the week before, the Attorney General issued a memo telling the archivist, who is essentially the clerk who publishes an amendment to our US Constitution, he said, no, that's not legal, you can't publish it. We had already had a letter from the archivist saying that he recognized Nevada's ratification, added it to the list. He recognized Illinois' ratification, and he provided a letter saying, when the final state ratifies, I'll publish the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, the Attorney General Barr memo said, nope, you don't get to publish that final state. And it was in January of 2020. So all these little roadblocks are making a lot of women angry, because technically the Equal Rights Amendment will go into effect actually January 27th this week. It'll be 2 years from when Virginia formally did all their finalization of their approvals and ratifications. And so we have a big celebration. We are assuming that the Equal Rights Amendment is actually enforced and enacted, because we've met the requirements of the Constitution, Article 5. So we've got a big press release that's coming out on Thursday, the 27th. We've got Sandy Pappas and Representative Rena Moran, who are putting forth a bill in our Minnesota legislature to essentially require Minnesota to review all of our laws, which should have been happening the last 2 years, to make sure that all the laws do not discriminate on the basis of sex. So we are moving ahead, and many states are, because all the states that had ratified are saying, wait a minute, we followed all the rules. We should have this in effect. So there are lawsuits galore that have been going on for the last 2 years. And now that we are at our 2-year mark of implementation, according to that original amendment that was sent out, the Equal Rights Amendment is officially enacted. And so states need to clean up their laws. And Minnesota is going to do that starting with January 27th in our legislature. So it gets complicated with the legal aspects of the Equal Rights Amendment, but the reality is we've met the Article 5 constitutional requirements. And even the archivist in a meeting with our national ERA coalition said he'd love to sign and publish the 28th Amendment. He just needs someone to tell him to do it. And this is part of our dysfunction in our government now. And part of what some people are calling a constitutional crisis is the amendment process was one good thing that our founders did. They created a process to live into the vision of democracy. And so we've had 27 amendments to our Constitution. So this would be the 28th, and it has met the constitutional requirements to be that 28th Amendment. So we're moving ahead. We're going to celebrate on the 27th. And then we're also going to have a rally on day one of our Minnesota legislative session. We've got a lot of partners and sponsors, and League of Women Voters is right in there with us for advocating for Minnesota to be able to add an amendment to our state constitution for that level of protection and have that added. So how that works is that the same thing as what happens at the federal level. The legislature passes a bill on both sides, House and Senate, that allows the citizens to vote on it on the ballot. So all we're asking our legislators are, please let Minnesotans vote on equality. Here again, we've passed it through the House, but we can't get it through the Senate. But we will be back there day one, showing our support and with our allies to say this is important. We do, and most people agree that equality of rights under the law should be available for all persons. So we've got a lot of things going on. And we also in the House, day one, we have on the House side, February 1st of there will be passing all of our ERA bills on the House side. So now we just need to work with the Senate to get that bills passed as well. So there's a lot of history here, and there's a lot of League of Women Voters history here that is on the same stream as the Equal Rights Amendment, and a lot of the same issues that were fought over and over and over again of getting a hearing, getting a vote, getting beyond whatever roadblock is there, whether it's one man as a committee lead or an entire Senate body. So takes a lot of energy, but we are so close, both with the federal and then with the state, that it's worth fighting for. So time's up for equality. We've got the support, and now we're going to advocate. So that's the big ask with this group is call your representatives, senators, and get their commitment to the Equal Rights Amendment in Minnesota, and also show up for our rally and show support. We'll be following all COVID requirements. Masks are required in St. Paul and in the Capitol. So good energy and a lot of opportunity to finally include women in our foundational documents, both at the state and the federal level. So now I'll open it up for questions, because that's a lot of information, but hopefully people have some questions about what's still needed.
All right, that's excellent. Thank you very much, Suzanne. That was a wonderful presentation, lots of information. We do have some questions, and I'd like to remind the viewers that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A here on our webinar, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, feel free to put it on the comment section. We've got a couple of minutes left, and we do have some questions already. So do you know, Suzanne, of the 26 states that have ratified the ERA, is there clear evidence of women equality?
Well, So here's the reality. We know that our laws only impact certain areas of society, just like we've seen with mask mandates. So who can tell what to do? You know, we do have over 80 corporations who are signed on for promoting equality, everything from Google to Apple. They all say, yes, yes, we'll pay all our people fairly, equally, and not discriminate on the basis of sex. But it really takes a law process and often going through a court system to actually force those decisions. So I know that Iceland has been on the forefront of this, and they still aren't at equality, but they have taken more and more steps like oversight, like a board of a corporation to say, should we have a certain percentage, and are we making sure we're paying those people who are in those same positions equally? So it will take oversight, but I think part of it is just that constant review and attention to sex discrimination in all our areas of work and life.
Right. I found the VAWA, the fact that there wasn't anything in the history that could be used in the Constitution to support not discriminating, not the violence against women. I thought that piece of your presentation was very interesting. It gives, we don't have an out, so it's almost a dead end, which is kind of surprising. Do you know, this is another question from the audience. Is the Black community or non-white community, BIPOC community in Minnesota involved at all in the ERA movement here in Minnesota and across the country? Can you talk about that at all?
Yes, and we have some both local engagement with some of our allies that are on our group, Isaroon, and especially our service workers and our unions. That has been an area where we see a lot of support, because essentially that's where they want to have equal pay for equal work. And especially, I was at a rally last summer on the Capitol for care workers and the care economy. And that's our next bill federally that's stumbling again, which majorly impacts minorities and women. And that demonstrates that still that lack of support. But I think, we've got support here in Minnesota, but we've also got a lot of issues that are on people's plates. So we do want to be inclusive, and we've got good support in our allies.
Absolutely. All right, fantastic. Thank you. Would the ERA protect women's access to reproductive health care?
It would, in terms of access to whole health care. That's the idea. The challenge here is that men and women are not the same. We have bodily differences. So there will always be some variability that has to be built in. But that doesn't mean that we can't be addressing issues where there is equality. And healthcare is one area where we know we need better access for especially women, and Black maternal care is absolutely needed, and something that we would have better grounds for achieving with equality on the basis of sex.
Great. Let's see, session starts January 31st here in Minnesota. Is there a bill number? So when the members, the people that are here watching, when they make their phone calls, what bill should they be referring to?
Yeah, and I can put them in the chat too. We've got bills for our Minnesota constitutional amendment is House File 406. And Senate File 323. We have, and so the one's gender, one is sex. These are two.
Okay.
In the other one, House File 726 and Senate File 850.
All right. And is the 406 323, is that one the sex?
Yes.
And 726 850, that's gender. All right.
Yes. And we have multiple bills because this is one way where we get more attention. So more authors, more bills. It gets a little messy, but we, pick those as our main ones, and the other ones drop off once they start moving through the legislature.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Let's see. Let's see. I don't know at the state level, but I know more. All right. So this is a question: is the League of Women Voters actively lobbying? Do you know? We're trying to find out at the state level if the state league is actively lobbying. Do you know?
I think so, because actually I was on the Lunch and Learn this afternoon, and
Okay.
they mentioned they, wanted the updates, and they said their lobbyists would be tracking and these bills, and I listed these. So these are ones that people are tracking and will be watching as they go through the session.
All right, fantastic. And I just can we be clear on the number of states that have ratified it and the number of states that have their own state ERA or the equivalent?
So we have 38 states that have ratified.
At the federal level.
At the federal level. So that's the magic number. That's 3/4. And so we think we rang the bell, and other states are continuing. And that's the same
Right.
thing that happened with the right to vote. More states came on, even many years later. But the more we have, the better. All 50 get there, great. So Arizona wants to, North and South Carolina, other states that are working on it. But 26 states have a state equal rights amendment, and they're varied forms. They might, like I mentioned, Texas added a little more language on theirs. And so that's, something they wanted to do. But basically, including sex is in 26 state constitutions.
That's excellent. So thinking about January 27th, does ERA have some social media assets that you could share with us in celebrating the 28th Amendment so that we could put it out? And is there anything that we could do there?
Well, yes, and this is evolving because nationally our lead organization, the ERA Coalition, they've got over 100 organizations that they've been working with, and they've been collecting a petition to the White House and to our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, to delete the Barr memo. They're going to deliver the petitions and go to the White House although they might be doing that virtually now because of COVID there. These are where things shift, but the celebration is happening, essentially saying January 27th, we're celebrating an equal rights amendment. So there are things we'll be sharing on social media, and we'd love to get those spread out and moved throughout whatever social media land we can get.
All right, that's excellent. Well, we'll look for that, and everybody put it out on social. Let's celebrate the 28th on the 27th. Let's do that. All right. We're after 8 o'clock at this point. So Suzanne, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think just that it is a serious issue. I think not all women have supported equality, and part of that, happened with the voting rights as well. But the truth is that it doesn't religious beliefs still stand. I mean, we have freedom of religion, but in our workplace and in our public spaces, in our work lives, the equality on the basis of sex is absolutely needed. And I think, our polls show that it has high approval, and it's just frustrating that we can't get that through our legislative bodies and have that support at this point. But I think with people stepping up, standing up, rising up, there's a video that's out on ERA Coalition that Gloria Steinem narrates, and basically that's what she says: step up, stand up, rise up, and push this over the edge and celebrate the 28th on the 27th. I think that's a great line.
That's excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for being here this evening. And we've got some last comments here. that we'd like to make, if I can move this. There we go. All right. So thank you, Suzanne, very much for being here. This is a great presentation, very informative, and we look forward to helping the ERA get passed. Thank you to the League of Women Voters St. Paul Program Committee for all of the work behind the scenes and putting this together. Thanks too for our supporters, the League of Women Voters Roseville area and the League of Women Voters White Bear Lake area. And also thanks to SCC and SPNN. And thank you to all of you for being here. There will be a survey at the end. So when you close out, there will be a survey. Please take a moment to answer some of those questions. We value your feedback and use it for future programming. And we hope to see you next month at our program on February 22nd. We will have Paul Huffman from the Minnesota League presenting on redistricting efforts. And I know it's going to be amazing. So be sure and register for that. Thank you all for coming this evening.